about Russia before you go.
About who?
Russia is accusing the U.S. of failing to deliver on quote-unquote agreements that or understanding that we had in Alaska.
Yeah.
Can you please,
there was no agreement in Alaska. There was a proposal in Alaska, but there was no agreement in Alaska. If there had been an agreement, we would have had an end of the war. So, as I said, the president is prepared, as the United States remains prepared to play whatever constructive role we can to bring about, an enduring end to this war in Ukraine, and which has been bloody. 20,000 soldiers killed every month, 5,000 a week, most of them Russian.
The first point concerns neutrality. However, when we discuss absolute neutrality, it's important to recognize that the term absolute neutrality probably doesn't apply here. The United States still supplies, or used to supply, some might say pseudo-free arms and assistance to Ukraine, now mostly for money. They provide support with various technologies. And this process continues, so there's clearly no such thing as absolute neutrality. At the same time, considering the influence the United States has over European countries in Ukraine, and given the apparent sincere desire of the U.S. president, whether it's Donald Trump or his negotiating team, to help reach a peaceful settlement, we highly appreciate this willingness.
Moscow calls out America's fake neutrality as Washington continues military support for Kyiv. Russia to US. You can't arm Ukraine while presenting yourself as an honest peace broker. Russia torches US mediator narrative, saying fresh arms deliveries undermine diplomacy. Amid clash, Lavrov accuses Rubio of distorting what was actually discussed during the Alaska talks. Lavrov, Rubio's claims don't reflect the reality of the negotiations held in Alaska, Moscow insists. Russia has accused the United States of claiming neutrality in the war while continuing to provide military assistance to Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson said ongoing U.S. military support for Kyiv undermined Washington's credibility as a neutral mediator in the conflict. Dmitry Peskov said the United States continued supplying Ukraine with weapons, technology, and other forms of military assistance despite mediation efforts. Peskov said the Kremlin still valued President Trump's peace efforts even though it viewed U.S. actions as contradictory. Russia's foreign minister also called for greater clarity on Washington's mediation role following recent remarks by Marco Rubio. The U.S. Secretary of State had said no formal peace agreement was reached during the Putin-Trump summit held in Alaska. Sergey Lavrov insisted President Putin accepted the U.S. proposals presented by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff during the Alaska meeting. He said Witkoff confirmed every point discussed during the meeting, making Rubio's version of events appear questionable. Lavrov said describing the Alaska understanding as merely a set of proposals was inelegant and did not reflect what occurred. According to Lavrov, the entire nature and credibility of Washington's role as a mediator now requires further clarification. The dispute followed months of stalled diplomacy after the US-Israel war against Iran began in February, reshaping regional negotiations.
About Russia before you go.
About who?
Russia is accusing the U.S. of failing to deliver on quote-unquote agreements that or understanding that we had in Alaska.
Yeah.
Can you please,
there was no agreement in Alaska. There was a proposal in Alaska, but there was no agreement in Alaska. If there had been an agreement, we would have had an end of the war. So, as I said, the president is prepared, as the United States remains prepared to play whatever constructive role we can to bring about, an enduring end to this war in Ukraine, and which has been bloody. 20,000 soldiers killed every month, 5,000 a week, most of them Russian. So it's been debilitating for Europe, but especially for Ukraine and for Russia increasingly. So we are prepared to step forward and play a constructive role if there's one for us to play in bringing the parties together and bringing that war to an end. That's what the president's tried to do now for a year and a half, but there was no agreement in Alaska. There was a proposal made in Alaska. But it was never an agreement.
By Russia or by the U.S.?
No, it's the same thing you've seen publicly reported, right? I mean, Russia wants the entirety of Donetsk to be turned over to them, among some other things that they raised. But there was never an agreement. Had there been an agreement, there would have been an end to the war, and that's been the fundamental problem. Okay? All right, guys, thank you.
Last August, the leaders of Russia and the United States reached a series of understandings regarding a political solution to the Ukrainian crisis. We remain committed to these understandings. They were, by and large, initiated by the Americans, and President Putin merely agreed to the proposals presented to us after carefully reviewing them. The ball is not in our court today, although they are increasingly trying to pass it to us from an offside position, to use the language of the now popular World Cup. This will not do. For Russia, this is a matter of principle, and we certainly will not waste time on temporary interim solutions, much less accept ultimatums dictated by someone else. Before Anchorage, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff came to Moscow and brought very specific proposals, which President Putin took on. And in Anchorage, Putin, told President Trump, "There are some nuances here, but I'll take those nuances on myself. I accept your proposal." But that was already a compromise. And now they're telling us, well, listen, it's not working out yet. Let's compromise again. We didn't compromise there. We simply agreed on how to end the fighting and begin resolving all the other issues at the negotiating table. Biden's sanctions were extended once again, and then already Trump's sanctions were imposed on Lukoil and Rosneft. The Pentagon has now created a new program specifically for Ukraine. A kind of testing ground in the U.S. is being prepared to master warfare techniques based on the experience of the fighting in Ukraine. And, of course, there are no restrictions, other than physical ones, on arms sales to Europe, so that it can continue to pump up Ukraine with them. So, in practice, we haven't accomplished anything positive. We haven't even been able to return our diplomatic property, let alone resume direct air travel, which we proposed. Not to mention that back in early 2025, we also proposed exempting all members of our Federal Assembly and the U.S. Congress from sanctions, as a gesture, because in practical terms, they don't achieve anything. People simply get some kind of moral and emotional satisfaction from imposing sanctions on someone. There's been silence on this matter. But regarding Ukraine, going back to where we started, we want to understand what happened there at the G7 summit in Evian. Because if you listen to French President Emmanuel Macron Anchorage agreement is buried, President Trump, the prodigal son of prodigal father, has returned to the family, and now, it seems, they are all back together again. But the Americans haven't yet told us what they took away from that G7 summit in Evian, how they see its results, or what their future course will be. As Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, and Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov have said, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner's next visit is being negotiated right now at their request. Of course, we'll listen to them.
Russia launched a fresh ballistic missile attack on Kyiv late on June 25, with Ukrainian authorities reporting at least 2 civilians were injured. Ukrainian officials said falling missile debris ignited a warehouse fire as air raid alerts returned across Kyiv in the early hours of June 26. Explosions were also reported in Kremenchuk as air raid warnings expanded to regions located far from the active front line. Moscow Mayor Sergey Sobyanin claimed Russian air defenses intercepted and destroyed 39 Ukrainian drones during the June 26 attacks. Sobyanin said the first wave of drone attacks began around 2:30 a.m., after which emergency services were dispatched to assess damage. Ukraine also announced a shift from sporadic long-range strikes to a sustained military campaign focused on Russian-held Crimea. Kyiv said the campaign had contributed to fuel shortages, electricity disruptions, and an exodus of tourists from occupied Crimea. Meanwhile, Ukraine said its troops had raised the national flag over the Russian-held Kinburn Spit during a special operation. Kyiv said Russian troops remained present in the area, with fighting continuing despite the symbolic display of Ukrainian control. Officials said the Kinburn Spit remained strategically important because Russia uses it to threaten shipping routes serving Mykolaiv. Russia's Lukoil-operated Norsy refinery in Kstovo halted operations after June 24 Ukrainian drone strike, according to Reuters. Russia's fourth-largest refinery and second-largest gasoline producer plays a critical role in maintaining the country's domestic fuel supplies. The attack reportedly damaged the CDU-5 processing unit, which is capable of refining around 12,000 tons of crude oil per day. The outage came as the Moscow refinery remained offline after earlier drone strikes, further deepening Russia's growing fuel supply problems. The Kremlin has already imposed fuel export restrictions as several Russian regions reported shortages and limits on fuel sales. Russia has deployed new electronic warfare systems on its Mi-28NM attack helicopters to counter evolving battlefield threats. The upgrade follows repeated Ukrainian FPV drone attacks that exposed vulnerabilities in Russian rotary-wing aircraft. Ukrainian FPV drones emerged as a major threat after successfully targeting low-flying Russian helicopters near the front lines. Several reported losses of Mi-28 and K-52 helicopters highlighted shortcomings in existing self-protection measures. Unlike traditional missiles, FPV drones can approach from unpredictable directions while flying at very low altitudes. Chapter plate. The new system is designed to detect, track and disrupt incoming threats before they can reach the aircraft. Official claims suggest the upgrade could significantly reduce the effectiveness of hostile FPV drone attacks. The appearance of similar systems on Su-34M strike aircraft suggests a broader force-wide modernization effort. The system reportedly detects drone control signals at distances ranging from approximately 4 to 7 kilometers. It is designed to jam commonly used FPV control frequencies operating in the 2.4 GHz and 5.8 GHz bands. Analysts claim the technology could reduce successful drone attack rates by an estimated 60 to 75%. The system may also interfere with satellite navigation signals relied upon by certain drone platforms. Russian military planners increasingly view helicopters as both strike assets and platforms for counter-drone operations. The Mi-28NM combines radar systems, electro-optical sensors and precision-guided weapons within a single platform. The concept mirrors Western military thinking that aircraft must play a larger role in future counter-drone missions.